Good to go? All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. At this time, I would like to call to order the May 15th, 2025 regular board meeting of the North County Transit District. Before we begin, members of the public who may be viewing the meeting on the district's YouTube page, please note that in order to make a public comment during the meeting, you must connect to the meeting using the Zoom link provided on the agenda. In addition, you must also register by sending an email containing your name or phone number and the agenda item on which you wish to speak to clerk@nctd.org. So before I ask Suhail Rodriguez, Clerk of Board, to call the roll, if you could please mark your attendance by pressing the attend button on the voting device in front of you, and then we'll also do a verbal roll call.
Madam Chair Bapatel,
Here.
Vice Chair Rexnella,
Here.
Board Member Martinez,
Here.
Board Member O'Hara, Board Member Garcia,
Here.
Board Member Joyce, Board Member Desmond, Board Member Edson,
Present.
Board Member Contreras,
Present.
Board Member Lee. This completes the roll with Desmond, O'Hara, and Lee absent.
Thank you. Board Member Martinez, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? All right. Suhail will now provide a safety brief and review the evacuation procedures.
Thank you. In case of an emergency, I will dial 911. In case of an evacuation, please take the stairs. Do not use the elevators. Once clear of the building, do not re-enter unless cleared to do so by emergency personnel. There are fire extinguishers and first aid kits on each floor of the building. There is a portable defibrillator on the first floor and staff on hand trained on CPR procedures if needed. This concludes my safety brief. And for the record, Board Alternate Coleman has arrived at 2:01.
Great, thank you. And may I ask you if there are any changes to the agenda?
No, Madam Chair.
All right, and we'll move on to public comments. Do we have any general public comments today?
We do, Madam Chair. There is one speaker on Zoom to speak on general public comment. Chris Kolek, you have 3 minutes. Chris Kolek, if you can please unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please proceed.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for having me. I submitted a request for an update on NCTD's efforts to pursue transit-oriented development beyond the agenda, but the response was that my email would be in the board packet. Now, the board packet was like 300 pages, so I assumed that no one saw my comments, which is why I'm calling in to make sure this important issue gets the attention it deserves. And again, thank you for having me. I live in Carlsbad, and I'm a regular transit rider. I commute from Carlsbad to Orange County on the coaster multiple times a week, and have been especially interested in the plans to revamp your transit stations. It makes sense operationally to clean up the sites so they're more efficient, modern, etc., but also super smart at the policy level to make some money for long-term support of public transit. Seems like a win-win across the board to get private developers to bankroll these infrastructure improvements. There was a lot of focus on this initiative early on, but I haven't heard anything in a while. Discussion of this issue has been sort of a piecemeal or just a project specific till now. But a deeper understanding of the strategy and approach and how all these transit stations work together for the greater good would be really nice. I'm interested in Carlsbad's 2 stations since I live there. But I'd also like to know how things are going in Oceanside because it's one of my stops for happy hour on my way home. And that place is definitely in need of some love. I think that the project is ahead of Carlsbad in the development queue, so I'm hoping we can learn from that process and get some best practices for our own transit stations. I can't wait to see these new and improved stations get off the ground. There are tens of thousands of people who are going to benefit from these projects. It would be great if there could be a board proclamation or something encouraging your colleagues in cities where those TODs are in process and educating them on how important they are to improving operations and efficiency, not to mention the other benefits. Each project is so much bigger than the specific city it's in. So that's all I have to say for this. And I really thank you again for allowing me to speak and taking this time.
Thank you, Mr. Kolek. No further speakers.
Great, thank you. Before we proceed, I do have a couple of quick protocol items to share. First, I will ask board members to please hold your comments and questions until each agenda item has been presented. And then second, when the time comes for board member questions or comments, please raise your hand and wait until you are called upon to speak. Please turn on and speak into your microphone when it is your turn to speak. This will ensure that your comments are heard for those listening to the meeting online. And lastly, when it is time to vote, please use the device in front of you. You may follow the instructions on the card in front of you. So with that, we'll move on to the first item, which is the approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes for the regular board meeting of March 20th, 2025?
So moved. Sinella.
Second, Edson.
Okay, moved by Sanala, seconded by Edson. Please vote.
Trust but verify.
On the motion of Vice Chair Sinella, seconded by Board Member Edson to approve the minutes for the regular board meeting on March 20, 2025, motion passes.
Awesome. All right. And then do I have a motion to approve the minutes for the special board meeting of April 17th, 2025?
Second.
Okay, moved. Thank you. Moved by Joy, seconded by Garcia. Please vote.
On the motion of Board Member Joyce, seconded by Board Member Garcia, to approve the minutes of the special board meeting on April 17, 2025, motion passes.
All right. So we're moving right along and we're on the consent items now. There are 7 items on the consent. Have any members of the public registered to speak on consent or requested that any of them be pulled?
No, Madam Chair.
All right, great. So at this time, we are ending the public registration to speak on consent items. Do any board members wish to pull any items from consent? All right,
No, but I'll make a motion to approve.
great, thank you.
Second.
Perfect. Moved by Contreras, seconded by Edson. Let's go ahead and vote.
On the motion of Board Member Contreras, seconded by Board Member Edson to approve consent items 1 through 7, motion passes.
All right. We are now on our informational item number 8. That is actually our last item on the agenda, and it's going to be, as you heard, informational, so no vote is required. Yoon Park Lint, our Chief Financial Officer, and Mary Dover, Chief of Staff, will provide an update on the development of the fiscal year 2026 operating budget and capital improvement program ahead of the board's consideration of the adoption in June. So I'll go ahead and pass it over to the two of you.
Thank you so much, Chair, members of the board. So today we wanted to provide you with an update, as the Chair mentioned, on the development of the FY26 budget, kind of on the heels of the larger conversation that we had at the workshop last month. We'll be providing you with kind of a summary of the conversation that we had last month and put that into context of what we can expect for the FY26 budget. We're developing this budget with the board's priorities in mind. Improving communications with our customers and how we can do that through investments in this budget, as well as right-sizing our operations and furthering planning work to make sure that the services that we provide are what's right for the community. We also have safety and security investments in the budget, our contracts with the San Diego Sheriffs and private contracted security. We've heard from cities and some of you that the investments that you made in the FY25 budget have really made a marked difference in passengers' experience on our modes and other transit centers. So thank you for approving that last investment. It'll be continued in this budget. We're also focusing on managing our investments where work can be completed in-house versus in a contracted environment, and what makes the most sense for our resources as we have them. And also we want to make sure that we're supporting local economies through our transit operations, making sure that where there might be a project in your communities, as Sean has mentioned multiple times, how we can support that, whether that be through something that might be in our budget or whether it's just support of improvements and projects that you have in your districts, what we might be able to invest in that might match those priorities. So as you'll see, this presentation today is mainly to give you an overview of some of our revenue sources, the allowable uses of those sources, any changes that we've made from, as you'll see in the staff reports, from the capital improvement program that we brought to you in January, and kind of where we're at right now in the budget development. As the chair mentioned, in June, you'll actually be asked to set the public hearing and then take action on the budget. But this is to provide you with an update on our development thus far. So I'll pass it over to you to do the meat of the presentation.
Good afternoon, board members. Before I dig in the numbers, I will be, there's some updates on some of the steps that we have taken before our meeting today. On January 23rd, we presented our proposed initial capital improvement program in order to meet deadlines for programming of these projects in the Regional Transportation Improvement Program. You will see in attachment C for the staff report that some changes have been made to that initial approval. Also on March 20th, through agenda item number 15, the board waived the provisions of board policy number 3 and board policy number 7 and approved the advancement of the full budget to the board. On March 24th, the Marketing, Service, Planning, and Business Development Committee received the assumptions for the upcoming fiscal year service implementation plan, as well as the key assumptions used in that plan. On April 17th, the board set a public hearing for June 25th to consider adoption of the fiscal year 2026 operating budget and the fiscal year 2026-2030 capital improvement program. Board policy number 17 requires that NCTD adopt an annual balanced budget where total revenues are equal to or exceed total expenses. It also requires that funds be programmed first to cover operating expenses, and any remaining unallocated funds can then be programmed for the capital improvement program. Also, it requires that one-time revenues can only be used for one-time expenses or capital investments. NCTD is proposing a balanced operating budget of $179 million for fiscal year 2026, which will be summarized in the last slide in this presentation. Revenue estimates are based on Federal Transit Administration published apportionment tables, SANDAC estimates, State Controller's Office estimates, agreements, and prior year's levels. Customer fares are projected based on the service implementation plan, ridership forecasts, as well as historical averages by fares by mode. This slide illustrates the estimated sources of revenue for fiscal year 2026. In the attached number A in the staff report, there is a detail of all the funding sources that we project to receive in the next fiscal year and the uses that are allowed for those funding sources. As you will see, out of the total of the funding sources that we have available, a little bit over 50% of that are restricted for only capital and maintenance expenses. Approximately half our budgeted expenses for fiscal year 2026 will be for salaries, wages, and benefits, and that includes the additional 471 full-time equivalents related to the insourcing of bus operations and maintenance. 26% of expenses will be contracted for services such as bridge repairs and inspections, facilities maintenance, environmental services, law enforcement and security, legal services, technical support and materials management for rail vehicles, software licenses and support, right-of-way vegetation removal, rail grinding, and various other contractor services. 100% of our total expenses are for materials and supplies, which includes fuel for diesel, compressed natural gas, hydrogen, and parts for revenue and non-revenue vehicles and equipment. This slide illustrates the proposed operating budget for our next fiscal year. Total revenues and total expenses are around $179 million, which represents reduction of $9 million compared to the prior fiscal year. After receiving board feedback today, if there are any adjustments that are needed for the operating budget, those will be taken into consideration before we propose a full budget for the upcoming June 26th board meeting. Our next steps is on June 20. On June 10th, we will release our documents for public review or comment. That will include the full draft or proposed budget. We'll also be publishing our proposed right-of-way recovery schedule, classification and compensation schedule, as well as our service implementation plan. On June 26th, staff will come back to the board for adoption of the fiscal year 2026 operating budget, as well as the capital budget and all the other related documents. That concludes my presentation, and I'm open for questions.
All right. Well, thank you for the presentation. Can we go ahead and check in to see if we have any public comments for this item?
No comments, Madam Chair.
All right. At this time, public registration to speak on this item will end. I'll go ahead and look over to my fellow board members to see if there are any questions or comments. Board Member Contreras?
Thank you so much. I don't know how you all are able to balance this budget with, there's not a lot of resources out there, but I really appreciate all the work that went into it. I just want to highlight one thing. I love the conversation about local economies, and I really appreciate that aspect being part of this framework. And I do just want to shout out to the Vista Downtown Committee. We're doing a walk audit June 3rd at 6 p.m. We're going to have our home base at the AVO in our historic downtown. And one of the questions that we got a lot from the public, question, comment, wanting to know a little bit more information, is the connection between the Vista Transit Center and the downtown and how to improve the flow. So, you know, I just love that there's even space in this conversation to highlight that. The other thing that I want to say is 0.3% growth is a scary number. But other than that, that's pretty much all my comments. Thank you.
Board Member Hudson?
Yes, thank you for the presentation and for the staff report that was provided. I did have one thing I would like to have a little better understanding of is on page 3 of the staff report, it talks about the fact that Sandag is providing NCTD with federal congestion management or CMAQ funds, which are being used for YOP. And I understand there was a funds swap that allowed that to happen. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, essentially, the program that YOP was pulled from, we could have used at some point in time for operating expense. Essentially, what they've done is a swap on that, so what we've received is capital money in return. To be blunt, that's not really a swap. I certainly understand the dilemma that they're in. I think they were caught off guard just as much as I think some of the transit agencies were in relation to some of the TDA fall off and Transnet reduction. I'm not sure they thought they were going to be impacted in that way, and they were impacted, I think, like every other transit agency was on some of the federal grant money that they got. I think for us as an agency and really MTS, I think as we go forward in the future, we need to be a little more thoughtful about not necessarily letting Sandag run with things that could change the course of policy for a transit agency. So if we're going to have a conversation about Youth Opportunity Pass, that should probably be done at this board's level, regardless of where that revenue comes from, so that we can decide what the best course of action is. Where that has potentially led us here is we really had a great opportunity to get more youth onto our service. And now we're in a position to, as an agency, to decide whether or not we felt like that was a good enough action for us to continue forward in the absence of a revenue source specifically from Sandag. Doesn't mean we're not looking for other opportunities. It just means long-term for us in the future, where do we find that money? And in the interim, do we continue that program? And I think we do want to continue that program as we continue to search for potential revenue sources. But we appreciate that Sandag gave us capital money. We're definitely going to use that. But it's not an even swap in terms of how we would be able to directly utilize that money versus the capital piece on it. I appreciate you bringing that up because it is not it's more of a tomato-potato situation and not an even swap. So appreciate you bringing that forward.
Well, I did actually understand it, but I know we have new members on the board, so I thought it might be something important to raise so that they understood it as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And I agree, it's not a real swap because our operations dollars are really precious, and more capital dollars, while useful, are not the same. So my other question was, on page 4 of the staff report, it talks about purchase transportation includes 1.5 million for contracted taxi for paratransit service. Is contracted taxi through a single vendor or single agency?
It's not. We have a few different options, very similar to some of our other TNCs that operate throughout the county. We do primarily use one or two that are large enough to handle sort of the scope of what we have. It's interesting, we really struggle a little bit with what that 1.5 number should be. We kept it the way it is to sort of manage it through the transition. One of the things we're going to look at through the transition is the effectiveness and maybe efficiencies that we can find by having our paratransit staff in-house and maybe being able to reduce that and shift it over to the operations side. But our team, Jeff and Lily, have been really working hard on that with Nick through the transition piece to kind of manage expectations. And they've really done a phenomenal job on that. But for budget purposes, we sort of had to throw a number in there. I think we feel very confident that we're going to be able to back way off of that and shift it into our staff operations. And it's kind of 6 in one and half dozen the other. Somebody's providing the service. It's just a matter of whether or not it's a taxi service or our service.
All right, thank you so much.
Any other board member questions or comments? Board member or Vice Chair Sanella?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Yoon, for the presentation. I caught in your presentation that you had mentioned that this year's budget is approximately $9 million less than last year's from an operational standpoint. I remember from the workshop, we kind of talked a little bit about the anticipated pressures on the operation budget, but I don't seem to recall, and it might be me, any discussion about how we might close that gap. So could you maybe give us like a high-level overview of what that $9 million less consists of? What did we take away?
So in prior years, for the capital program, when we receive federal dollars, there's a requirement to match those with local dollars. So for this capital program, we are going to be using match. Instead of using our existing local dollars, we're going to be using prior year reserves. So reserves, so we have some reserve for capital that we'll use to be able to, support operations. But obviously, as you have seen through the projections, we have quite a bit of pressure from the operating side because those revenues are going to remain relatively flat in the next 5 years. But for this year, we'll be covering our capital needs with reserve. Okay.
Well, thank you for that. And having been in government for quite some time between water districts and now the city, I know it's not sustainable to use reserves. And so, in your expert opinion, I mean, is this a one-time thing, or is this something that you think we're going to have to draw upon in future years as well?
So as Sean has shared before, I think we'll be fine in the next 2 years, but we're going to be facing financial challenges as we look into fiscal year 2028.
Okay.
And then how we either gain efficiencies to reduce operating costs or look for new revenue sources.
Yeah, I think the interesting space of this part is when we have to apply local match to the capital projects, it essentially comes out of what looks like the operating budget because it's local dollars. I think the goal was to sustain the operations, and we can continue to do that. The little bit of nuance piece is if we pull from reserves specifically for the capital projects, it allows us the opportunity to go back and reevaluate if capital projects are feasible within the year. And if they're not, we can remove them and put that money back into reserves instead of locking it up with operating dollars. Okay. So that was kind of the thought on that. We're working to try to change, and we had some great visits in Sacramento and have been talking with our DC folks about changing the language on how capital projects are funded and how much of that local money really needs to be applied to that. And I think there's a pretty robust conversation at both the state and national level to try to change some of that. This year was just a little bit of a fail-safe for us to make sure that some of our capital projects that needed to get done were funded if we continue forward with the ones that are on the CIP.
Right. Thank you. appreciate that. And this is not a question, more kind of a statement maybe for my colleagues, is that as we go into next year and future years, and we have this greater conversation about these pressures that we anticipate we're going to have on our operation budget, I would like, maybe this is a new board member point of view, but I would like to have a little bit more of like a workshop about what, if there's going to be services impacted, you'd like to have like a dedicated conversation about what that looks like. And really include some of the data around what's the best way to use the resources we have so that we can benefit the most people. And that will be basically based off of ridership data, right? And in my mind, off the top of my head. And so I know that we're not at that point right now, but as we go over the next 9, 12 months, as we start looking at next year, the following year's budget, which will probably be here before we know it, I'd like to have a deeper conversation about that.
Any other questions or comments from over here? I see Board Member Martinez, and then I'll come back to you, Board
Just a
Member
quick
Edson.
question. So now it begs the question, how robust is our reserves?
We have enough reserves to sustain our capital projects for the next fiscal year from the match standpoint. Now, if we're looking at significantly big capital projects, we'll need to get more resources from the state level to be able to match those big capital projects. But for the most part, what we call our state good repair projects, which are the ones to maintain our facilities and our vehicles and state good repair, we have enough reserves to cover us the next 2 years, but not for major projects, only for state of good repair.
And then in time, we'll learn what these major projects are, right?
Yeah, and typically when we get into the larger projects, we'll find ways either from the state grant funding to sort of offset the local match at a federal level. So there's opportunities for us to do that. Like we've done double tracking or some of the other projects that have existed over the past couple of years. The large chunk of the local money has been covered by state grant funding. The smaller ones, like some of the more local state of good repair projects that we do at facilities, are largely covered by local reserve dollars or local operating dollars. And I will say over the past couple of years, and I think I've mentioned it here at the board meeting before, there has been, we have to revisit what our facilities look like. And one of the initiatives we've had over the past 2 years is we need to make sure they're in working order. We've got a few facilities that have not been updated, have not been anything in 20, 25 years. And we need to make sure that they're in a state where we don't have to try to find federal money to build a new facility. We think those facilities can last another 25, 30, 40 years if they're kept up correctly. So that's kind of the push for this year. We've got a lot of state of good repair projects locally that have pulled a little more out of reserves. I think the thought process is if we don't hit those now, they'll cost twice as much 4 or 5 years from now. So we really need to stay on top of that. And some of that is station work. Some of that is facilities at Sprinter Ops and West and East Ops Bus. So, we hope that we don't have the super big projects we have coming down the pike. We'll find the local match, hopefully at the state level.
Thank you.
Board Member Edson?
Yes, thank you. If going to attachment 9B, everything's pretty clear here, and thank you very much for that, for somebody who's not, not her jam, doing finance. But under non-transportation revenues, I noticed in 2024 that they were quite a bit higher than they have been for 2025 and 2026. What are non-transportation revenues, and is that something that we can continue to pursue to give us a little extra?
So we always have a conservative approach on how we budget for transportation revenue. One big piece of that was about $1 million was directly associated with credits from the CNG at the federal level. So those credits expired last year on December 31st, and those are no longer available.
Is Amtrak part of that too? When San Clemente was non-operational, there was some revenue not generated as a function of not running when San Clemente was down.
Yeah, I think those are under auxiliary, under the $9 million. But we also receive credits from our CNG use. We actually use 100% renewable natural gas. So we receive credit from the RIN federal program as well as the state LCFS program. And this one is kind of, it's a bit tricky because as you transition to hydrogen fuel, you lose all those credits. You get credits for using RNG, but you don't get credits for using hydrogen fuel.
Yeah.
So And then there's also investment income. So everyone knows that interest rates have been very high. So actually, our investment income have been pretty strong in the last couple of years. But we don't know, we were more conservative on how much investment income we think we're going to get in the next 2 years. We got close to $2 million in fiscal year 2025, but we rebaselined to $1 million because we have to be conservative and we don't know what the direction is going to be. So that's part of the direction as well.
All right, thank you.
All right. Oh, thank you, yeah, Board Alternate Coleman.
Sorry,
And
just
then
one
Board Member
question.
Joyce.
Do you have to have a certain level of reserves? I believe at the city of San Diego, 10% of our reserves has to match whatever is in the general fund. So just for my knowledge, you have to have a certain level.
So the board policy requires that we maintain a minimum cash balance. Yeah, it's $50 million operating, or at least we have to have sustainable cash to maintain 6 months of operations. So we typically get a lot of reimbursements as we spend the money. So we typically don't need to have more than $50 million. Our cash reserve is pretty solid. If you look at our audited financial statements from fiscal year 2024, we had, I think, close to $90 million in cash. And then this year, we're probably going to end up over $100 million. So there's a requirement to maintain a minimum cash balance of $50 million. A lot of those dollars are attached to capital. As you can see, we received the money, but we cannot use those for operations. We just got advance to get those on hand as we advance our capital projects.
Okay, yeah, I figured that was already put into the calculations, but just wanted to check. Thank you.
Board Member Joyce.
Looking at the passenger fares line item for revenues, the 2024 was 10.7 million, and then the budget for this year was 10.2. Are we on track? Are we doing better than 10.2? When do you think the actuals will come in above that?
So our actual passenger fares are pretty close to our projections. We rely on the projections from the service department on ridership, and then we apply the historical average fare per passenger. It's not really the one-way fare that you see published because obviously there are reduced fares or you have passes, right? So
Right.
when you have a monthly pass, the cost per fare is lower because you buy pass in advance. The other great news is that for fiscal year 2026, we're going to have a brand new U-Pass program where we have, I don't know, Sean, you want to speak about that new U-Pass?
Well, I thought that meeting went very well, and I
Yeah.
would say kudos to our Director of Planning, Katie Persons, and Yoon, who really sort of handled that meeting. But our relationship with the university and our previous UPass was just Sprinter and some of our bus operation allowed on that pass, and we received, I think, $1.25 per student.
$130 per registered student.
Per student, and we've essentially tripled that number, but we've given access to every mode in the system. So they have access to Coaster, everything except for NCTD Plus. They're going to have to pay the premium on that, but every other service that exists, our regular service, they have access to now at UCSD. That was a big deal. I guess we can say it now since it's locked in, but MTS's passes went down and ours went up. So we heard all about that from our friends down the street. But we think that's a positive for us because now they have access to not only all of MTS's network, but they have access to all of NCTD's network. So we thought that was really a good tool for us when we walked in and we talked about really either access from high schools or from the community college to get to whichever university they see fit. We've got a great university along our Sprinter line. We've got great universities along our Coaster line, and we really wanted to provide opportunities for people to get that, And so kudos to the team. They really did a great job of negotiating that rate. And so you're going to see that sort of factored into what we get every year from UCSD. And, really proud of the work that the team did. They did a great job on that.
Thank you. And then throughout the year, projecting a 22% increase on passenger fares it's a big jump. So I guess when do we typically get the update on how we're hitting our budget marks on a typical year? It's a new guy question.
So we produce quarterly reports to the board for every
Okay.
quarter, where we compare actuals to budget and the same period in the prior year. So our next quarterly report, which will report for activity through March, that will go to the board in June.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I have some questions. Is everyone, it looks like everyone else is done. Okay, perfect. I just wanted to make sure. All right, thanks again for the presentation. And I just wanted to, I know Board Alternate Coleman asked around the reserve policy, and I'm glad that you did because I had that same question. Just wanted to build off of that a little bit because from what I'm understanding, of the 90 million that's there, we have to make sure that we maintain a cash balance of 50 million. Is that correct?
50 million strictly for operations as a
Okay.
minimum.
Okay, so is there a percentage that we have to maintain at all times? I know the reason I ask is because, for instance, at the city, we had created a reserve policy which has a percentage, and since the budget is always so dynamic, that's just something that I was thinking might be beneficial for us to look at, whether it's at the PAF level or whatever else. But I just wanted to raise that, and I can just leave it at that since I know we're not agendized to discuss that, but I just wanted to make a comment on that and ask about that. So that was one. And then the other question was around, with the state of things going on, not only at the state level, because we heard about the May revise and where things are at over there. And then, of course, with all of the economic uncertainty at the federal level, I was just curious if you all could share a little bit about how you feel we'd be impacted. Obviously, we're seeing some great crunching of numbers here, and that's awesome. But I just want to know how we are factoring all of that into this, that uncertainty, and how we're going to ensure that we can ride some of that uncertainty going into the next year.
So for the most part, I would say that over 80% of our revenues are projections done by either the SANDAC, State Controller's Office, or tables already allocated by the FTA. So, and then we project other revenues like auxiliary and non-transportation. We always have a very conservative approach, and you can kind of see when we present our quarterly reports to the board, you'll see that typically our revenues tends to be a little bit higher for those. But for the other ones, 80% really comes from SANDAC's estimates. They have a group of economists that are constantly looking at these numbers on a monthly basis because it has regional impact for Transnet, for TDA. And I know as well that SANDAC does maintain some reserves for TDA. Last year for fiscal, actually for this year that's going to end on June 30, 2025, the impact was only $1.6 million, and it would have been higher, but SANDAC allowed the release of some of those TDA reserves, so the transit agencies will not be as impacted. But we are relying pretty much on SANDAC to give us those numbers, the biggest numbers, which is sales tax driven, TDA and Transnet.
Okay, and I'm sure we're factoring in inflationary pressures and all of that as we're looking at everything. Okay, perfect. Did you want to say something?
No, I was just going to say, from a legislative perspective, a couple things that we have been talking about, both in Sacramento and in DC, is how it's worded in legislation, what that funding can be used for. And the best example I'll give is there's some federal dollars that we're actually trying to get safety and security rolled into that so that we can remove some of the safety and security components away from our operating budget and more into some of our federal grant budget. Same thing at the state level. It's very prescribed how we can use some of our state grant dollars for certain things. And what we've asked for is, if there's an inability to increase those dollars, would the legislation, would our legislators be willing to make an adjustment to the wording that says the agency can choose up to some portion of that funding, whether or not it wants to use it for operating or capital expense? And there seemed to be an appetite to have that conversation. Really leave it up to the local agency to decide whether or not they want to use that sort of specified annual dollars for operating expense to keep service out there or for capital projects. And it allows them the opportunity to kind of shift back and forth. If they have a big project coming up, they can put more into capital. If they want to expand service, they can put some more into service. And so we're thankful that there seemed to be an appetite for that. How we sort of execute those things over the next 2 years is going to be kind of our chief priority.
Okay. Actually, I have a couple other questions and then I'll wrap it up. Looking at the state grants, I see that, next year we anticipate a bump in that number. And I wanted to ask, kind of following up based on what I just asked previously, how are we anticipating that bump in that number? I guess I'd be curious to hear a little bit about that.
State is SB 125 or is it TCP?
For the state grant, so I notice here under state grants, I'm looking at the budget, and in the proposed budget for next year, it goes up by about $10 million. And so I was just curious, when we're looking at that, how are we anticipating that will go up from what we received this year to next year? Again, given what my line of questioning was regarding the state budget and everything.
So a piece of that state fund is state transit assistance. So state transit assistance are revenues generated from tax on, mostly on gasoline, on fuel. Those estimates are provided by State Controller's Office. So in prior years, we had utilized STA funding, which is pretty flexible. It can be used for operations of capital, to use them as a match for capital projects. And that's to your question, to the earlier question on how you covering the match for your capital projects. We're using reserves. So the increase in the state funding for our operations is not an increase in funding. It's just that now we're using more of those dollars for operations and we're using our reserves for capital.
That's helpful. Thank you. I'm glad I asked.
Yes.
And then the last question, I know we've been talking about a legislative fix in order for us to be able to tap into more dollars that will allow for us to utilize it for operating costs. And so can you, if you can, share with us what the process is going to look like, a realistic timeline for us to get there, and then how we can help as your board?
Yeah, so we actually, Sean and I were in Sacramento last week talking with our legislators about, and as part of a conference of transit leaders on how we're going to approach this topic. So we can do it through the cap and trade process, where we can ask for, if they're unable to provide us a greater percentage of the cap and trade revenues, at least to allow us the flexibility to utilize them as we see fit based off of our needs, whether they be capital or operating. And then at the federal level, Sean and I are going to be in DC next week having similar conversations about the surface transportation reauthorization legislation and how, again, if they can't grow the pie, at least allowing us flexibility. One of the things, as Sean mentioned, we're going to be looking at safety and security is a big priority for this administration. And so what their willingness would be to allow us to use some of our federal dollars to cover some of those expenses, aligning with their priorities. So the timeline is now.
Okay, so as soon as possible, it sounds like, as much as we can. Okay, and how can we help? How can the board help?
Yeah, so I've actually, we're finishing a fact sheet today that I can distribute to the board that kind of outlines our priorities, at least on the federal level. We have a state one that's ready as well. We can distribute that to the board with our talking points about each of these topics.
Awesome, that would be great. And if it ever feels like, this might be too much to add to your plate, I'm just throwing it out there, but if it ever feels like you need us to go and lobby as the entire board or something, I'm sure many of us would be interested in helping with that. Yeah, right? Road trip on one of our buses.
Yeah, we do have, especially where we're talking to representatives that represent your cities, that would be incredibly helpful. And we'll try to make sure that ahead of time we can invite you to those opportunities to see where it fits your schedule and how we can do that.
Great, thank you. Those are all my questions, and I embedded some of my comments, so I don't have anything else. Is there anything else from the rest of the board? All right, I am seeing none. So we will go ahead and move on. Thank you so much for the presentation. There's no vote required, so we'll move on to our Chief Executive Officer's report. Mr. Donaghy, do you have anything to report?
Yeah, Madam Chair, members of the board, thank you very much. I will say, just as an update, we are putting together a fair study workshop for the board. We did talk about doing that at one of our committee meetings. We're still working through that. Just want to make sure you know that that's still in the plan for us. Appreciated the public comment that we received today on TOD. We're still working through a lot of the TOD items that have been brought to the board. There are a few things that have been, I don't want to say put on hold, but they're looking through them a little more, specifically on some of the Oceanside and Carlsbad stuff. more than happy to bring a TOD project update back to the board. In fact, we'll do that probably do that next month. So we'll get that on next month's agenda. So we've got sort of a TOD update. As Mary mentioned, we went to Sacramento. We had a great visit with a lot of our folks up there. Clearly, they're dealing with a lot of the same stuff that we're dealing with locally, and just appreciate their partnership. Had some great conversations with them about what some of the policies look like that are coming out of Sacramento at the state level, how those are going to affect us locally, how we can either help with that or provide comments if we need to. And so really great visit. Mary went for the entire conference. I was only able to go up for our visits with our legislators, but it was a great day. As usual, Mary did a fantastic job. We'll be in DC next week, kind of running through the same thing. Part of the reason that we're sort of on an information gathering session right now, which is a little different than we've done in years past. There's a fair amount of changes, even within DOT and FTA, that are happening. They're not necessarily negative, they're just different. And so we need to really find out how policies that we currently have sort of interact with the things that they want to do at the federal level and how we can sort of manage those things. I think this administration, from some of the conversations we've had with them, are very interested in infrastructure and how we manage public transit as a whole. I think they just have a different view on how that bank gets distributed. And we'll work through that and figure that piece out. We've had some really good conversations with our friends at Caltrans about some of the Sprinter conversations we've been having. I know we've been wanting to bring that to the board for a while now. We're really sort of in the throes of talking about what the state is wanting to do long-term in terms of vehicles they would like to purchase. I think they have a really good idea. Their thought is essentially that for a lot of intercity rail agencies and possibly for agencies like ours that have sort of a hybrid heavy rail and then a hybrid rail, they really want to get to this point where we all sort of have like vehicles and sort of like issues, so that when something happens, we can lean on our other transit systems to get parts and do the things that are sort of responsible from a state agency. And so I'm really interested in that, and I think they've done a good job of sort of putting that together. So that's been a little bit of the delay in us bringing that info session to the board, but we got a lot of good stuff going on. And I don't want to make it too long today. I'll leave on a very positive note. We had our triennial review this past week. If you've ever been through one of those, I'm sorry to hear that. If you never have to go through one of those, don't. We're very fortunate to have a really great relationship with Region 9. Our regional administrator, Ray Tellis, has been around our business for a long time. Rusty and Charlene that work up there are fabulous. And the agent that came down and helped us, their contractor that came down and helped out with the review, both of those individuals have a great deal of transit experience in their own right. I'm proud to report that I think for the first time in the agency's history, we scored perfect. Yeah. So personally, I just tied my old man for most consecutive, so I had a lot riding on this. Thanksgiving was going to be pretty rough this year if I didn't make it. But I really want to take a minute to thank the entire staff, but specifically Lori and Karen Tukolsky and Mary Dover. They just did a fantastic job of pulling all the information together and sitting through all of the things. The thing that's important about a triennial is two things. There's always opportunities to improve, and the conversation is what matters. So when they look at what we do and they say, hey, you're doing a good job at this, here's what this other transit agency does, and maybe you could do it a little better. So take that with you. And I think that is almost as important as the audit itself, as what do we really get out of the audit? It doesn't mean we're done, doesn't mean we're just going to close up shop for 3 years and we'll see you. We're going to continue to improve our process and make it even better. It's really an opportunity through the triennial for us to explain how our policy matches the things we do, and when we have sort of roadblock issues that come up, are we as an agency calling the right people to get the help we need to get us on the right track? And clearly the audit showed that we have a good policy base, that our board has put together from a board perspective, and then our employees have put together from an internal policy perspective. Certainly doesn't mean we don't have opportunities to improve. It just means that as an agency, we do a good job of knowing what our process is and putting those into action when we need to and making course corrections when we should. So I'm really proud of the group. I think the team did an amazing job. That's a big deal in our business, is to kind of give you a statistic. Less than 7 or 8% of all transit agencies in the nation score a no findings on a triennial review every year. It really speaks to the policies internally the organization has, and moreover, the board's policies and the board's oversight of our management of the business. So I would say thank you to the board as well for that. But leave on a high note today. It was great to get that. I know we were all sweating bullets for a hot minute. So last Friday, when we got on the call with them, when we turned off the Teams call, we all just kind of collectively exhaled. It's a pretty intense couple days. They're only here for 2 or 3 days. They kind of rip through everything. There's 23 topics. It changes every year. Sometimes it's 28, sometimes it's 17. Depends on what year it is. But 23 topics this year that range from everything from safety and security to procurement policy to how we manage ADA, Civil Rights Office, all those things. So it was really nice. Everybody in the departments that came in and spoke to the reviewers did a great job answering questions and really represented the very best of what our agency's about. And so proud of them and proud of the work we did. And we're going to keep pushing forward. We've got some work to do, and we're not done with best practice. We're always going to reinvent what we do and try to make it better. And that's our goal for the next triennial. So that's all I have. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So Shauna, I wanted to know if you wanted to say anything about the NOP being released. Do you know about that?
I can, yeah. In fact, I had a conversation with Mario about that the other day.
Just the FYI that it is being released.
Yeah,
There's a scoping.
It is being released. I don't have too many details on, I was just given a heads up that they were going to release it. I do think it's important for all of us to really go through that document, not only as an agency, but as a board, really have a conversation about things that do or do not work for us. And this is really the time to sort of step in and sort of make those things heard. I think we did a good job of doing that during the public comment. Now that it's really kind of been nailed down to a few things, it's really time for us to kind of step in and do that. It's an interesting space for us as an agency, and we've kind of talked about that before, that we as an agency have to be very careful the comments that we give, because at the end of the day, we as the agency will have sort of the overriding decision about whether or not we think that's the best course of action, because it's our railroad. But definitely be on the lookout for that and give them some feedback. Don't give us some feedback. Oh, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Oh, I'm just saying for people who
Yeah,
may
go
not
ahead.
know.
Go ahead and give it.
Okay, Lori's turn.
Lori's turn.
My turn.
I just want to make sure I'm not diving into any legal
No,
issues here.
I was thinking, for the benefit of the public and for members of the board who may not be aware what the NOP is and what is related to, I thought we should at least, identify the subject matter, which is the rail realignment project.
So I'll just share that that's going to be released, and then there'll be a scoping meeting at the fairgrounds in the Sound on the 29th of May. And then I believe that there's a 45-day period for people to comment and get that in. So they're communicating it, I think, really well with the community to let them know that this is happening.
Yeah, they've done a good job.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure I didn't step in any legal buckets here by giving away too much information. Occasionally, I get kicked under the table over here, so.
All right, so it sounds like we already are jumping into board member reports and comments. So does anyone else have anything to report? Board Member Edson?
Yes, so LoSAN board meets on Monday. I had my board briefing just prior to this meeting, and I understand that OCTA has shared with their board and the public that Metrolink is on track to complete the project in San Clemente on time, and that on time date is June 10th, so hopefully it might even be earlier, who knows, but,
Awesome. Anyone else? I know I have something. Anyone else? Board Member Joyce?
I just wanted to share briefly about an experience, and I wanted to also just send a question up the flagpole. We had talked about the NCTD Plus. I think this was brought up before about it being in Spanish, the app being utilized in Spanish. And so it's still in English only, so I just wanted to flag that and see, you may not have an answer now, if there's a plan to move it to have a Spanish version available. But if not, we can just, you can follow up with a memo later. You don't have to do it now if you don't.
Just one quick thing to add. So your phone's native language setting has to be set to Spanish in order for the app to be available in Spanish.
Okay, so when you sign into the app and it asks you which version, it'll automatically
Yeah,
prompt
so
Spanish?
in your Samsung or iPhone, you'll have to set the language settings to Spanish. And then in the app, it'll pop up and give you the option to choose Spanish.
Oh, okay. All right.
We can
That's
maybe
good to know.
provide some how-tos on
Yeah,
on how that works.
can we look into seeing if, my guess is it's a little different than a website. Like a website, we can pick which language we want it in, but
Yeah,
on an
yeah.
app, I don't know if that's a coding issue or,
Yeah, we can follow up.
yeah, we can take a look at that.
Great. And then I did want to share because this week I actually was invited by some high school students to join them on their ethnic studies culminating project, which is a youth investigation of something that's going on in the community. And so they wanted to look at bus safety. So they invited me to take a trip with them on the bus. We did have a little bit of a frustrating experience getting on the bus. There were a lot of students lined up and ready to get on after school. And I guess there was a miscommunication with the driver, but the driver ended up taking off, and then another bus came afterwards. So that part was something they said happens from time to time, but I wanted to, in full transparency, let my board colleagues know. When we did get on the next bus that came, it was very clean, and the students knew what to do, and they were very competent bus riders. It was, again, packed. And so the great positive news is, we have young people that are engaged, competent, and very invested in our bus system and using it effectively to get home and get to their secondary locations. Several of them were going to their work afterwards, and they were using the bus to get to work after school. So just wanted to report out the general experience. I've already spoken with staff, and I appreciate that they're going to follow up on making sure that experience with the bus taking off before they were ready doesn't happen again, and that we can continue to serve everybody in a very positive manner. But I did want everybody else to know. And most of them had signed up for youth opportunity passes. A few of them were having trouble with the access points, but most of them had it. Most of it was working, and they were generally happy with using the buses. So.
We would love to help that group out too, if they ever wanted to come and have a conversation with us about their observations. We would love to welcome them in and have that combo with them.
If you want to see their project, they are presenting on Monday all day long at El Camino High School. And so they'll be there 8:30 to 3:10, I believe. And I can follow up and connect you with the teacher if anyone wants to go to it. But they, among all the other projects that are going to be presented, they'll be having their trifold, and they'll have a little spiel, and they'll show their evidence on their project. And yeah, they were amazing. They're going to be doing great things. And two of them are juniors, so they'll still be using next year, and we can follow up and continue to use their voice to make our experience better.
Thank you. Yes, Board Member Edson had another comment.
Yes, I forgot to mention that May 31st and June 1st are the 44th annual Fiesta del Sol in Solana Beach, which is easily reached by the coaster. So I hope everybody will take the coaster to Solana Beach and walk over to Fletcher Cove Park to enjoy a free music festival with lots of fun and games for people of all ages.
I see Board Member Garcia inching towards his mic.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question. As I drop off my daughter at school, and I've mentioned about the buses that come to Orange Glen High School and drop off a lot of students, right? But then I noticed that one of the buses said not in service. I said, oh, there must be a bus driver that's learning the route, something like that. But no, it was full of kids, but it said out of service or not in service on the top. And I was trying to figure out, well, why are the kids in it if it's not in service?
Yeah, we occasionally will have a overcrowding situation, and dispatch may instruct them to go into drop-off only mode, which we believe is what happened yesterday. The driver, when they get to the stops, needs to communicate that, and they typically do. A lot of times on some of our heading to school routes and moving away from school routes, it's standing room only. And we just want to make sure that we're not piling a bunch of folks in there near the front door. That may have been what it was. They probably should not have had a not in service sign up. That might have just been an accident. We can have our team check on that.
Yeah, it was a few days ago. I don't remember exactly when, but it was surprising, and it wasn't full, but I said, oh, no one's in. And then I looked, I said, oh, no, there are a whole bunch of kids in there. It wasn't full, though. But anyway, I thought I'd ask. Thank you for the answer.
Okay. All right. So yes, thank you for everything today. Really, I think we had a great discussion. I also wanted to make sure that I raised a point that we had a meeting with some constituents in Carlsbad regarding safety improvements about at-grade crossings in Carlsbad Village. That was attended by myself and NCTD staff, and I know that we wanted to share that NCTD is working on it, and I don't know if Mr. Donaghy wants to add anything, but I just wanted to make sure that was part of the record.
Yeah, I would just say, always appreciate when we have the opportunity to meet with members of the public, especially on topics that don't always hit our board meeting. And in this case, we were having a really good conversation about Carlsbad Village and Grand Avenue and a few other places kind of adjacent to our Carlsbad Village station. And we had recently made some safety improvements over there related to the gate that crosses the track. We opted to weld that shut and close it off and make people kind of walk around the block to get to the station. One of the pieces that we've been working on for a while there is some pedestrian crossing gates on the other side of the road where there isn't a stop gate for traffic. So between those three intersections, that kind of came up as sort of the main topic of conversation, and we wanted to reassure everybody that that is on our list of things. It's sort of a phase in. There's things that are a little bigger than just costs associated to the agency on that. Depending on if we want to go a quiet zone route, if we don't want to go a quiet zone route, how do we manage the property adjacent to the sidewalk? Who owns that? Can we work on that? How do we get the signal wire and fiber over there? So a lot of good work happening in Carlsbad right now. We're going to continue to push forward with our safety stuff, and definitely appreciated the feedback that we got. And I think it was very valid, what was brought forward. So we're going to continue to work on that.
Thank you. I also just wanted to shout out thanks for all the amazing work that's being done on social media. This is just like a personal comment I wanted to make because I've been noticing how robust the communications have been, and I just love the highlights of the employees as well. I think that's been a really great touch because it allows folks to really humanize the agency. So I just wanted to say thank you and kudos to the team that's working on that, because I do think I've seen a difference in what we're putting out there. And as a AAPI elected leader, very exciting to see the Asian American Pacific Islander flag out front, and also just the work that you all are doing on raising awareness on different groups in our community. So thank you for doing that. With that, I need to check in to see if we have any remaining public comments.
We do not.
All right, at this time, public registration to speak on remaining public communications will end. And so with that, the next scheduled meeting is our Marketing, Service Planning, and Business Development Committee meeting on June 11th, 2025 at 12 p.m. And then our regular board meeting will be June 26th at 2 p.m. And we are adjourned at 3:03.